it's Drybear. Mecha BREAK is in the middle of its open beta, and what I wanted to do today is just kind of do a preliminary tier list for the strikers that are in the game right now. This is obviously going to be based on just limited testing and matchmaking that's kind of all over the place, and I think the most valuable aspect from this video should just be the conversation around the mechs and where they sit right now in the game. Not necessarily that this is tried and true. Doesn't mean that the things that I put in S are going to be the best in the game forever, or even in your opinion, or even the ones at the bottom can't do exceptionally well. I think right now you can actually win. After the most recent round of balance changes, I think all of the strikers can do well in all game modes right now, but hopefully this conversation is at least interesting enough. If you're just starting to get into Mecha BREAK, you can see where all the roles and strikers fit relative to each other. And I went through and made some really close-up shots of all of the strikers, so you can see their helmet at least, which helps identify which one's which. And of course, if you're just starting out, you probably don't know what any of these mean, but I'm just going to keep this quick and dirty and just go through each of the strikers, where I think they sit on the list, and talk about where they are overall. Starting out with Alysnes. This is the tutorial character. This is the first striker that every account has access to. This is their kind of poster child, very Gundam-like. Unfortunately, as of right now, even after the last round of buffs, I'm going to put Alysnes right here in C. Again, it doesn't mean that Alysnes is unplayable or can't win games. I just think compared to the impact that the rest of these strikers have on the list, Alysnes is a little bit lower right now. They were far worse. Like if you asked me yesterday or the day before, I would put Alysnes down in D, but I think since the recent changes, it have made a lot of really good changes. They increased the engine recovery and the amount of engine that Alysnes has, gave him more damage on the pistol and more damage on the melee as well, which has made a huge difference. I think when played really well, Alysnes can make a big impact, but again, relative to all this. So what does Alysnes do? They have the rearm and the cheat death mechanics. They're able to die anywhere, depending on how they play, like 2 to 3 times per battle without actually perishing and getting a death on their scorecard. So they're able to kind of play a little more aggressively, a little more in front of people and try and flank people and get some damage done. And after the balance patch, I was playing some Alysnes today. Super fun, a lot more reliable, and good enough damage to pick people off if they play well. The problem with Alysnes is that when they're very mode dependent. On some of the modes, the more chaos there is on the map, the better Alysnes does. So if it's like a payload map, or you have to kind of stand and fight on an area, Alysnes has a much harder time dealing with that. And on the chaos maps, like when you're doing the Shatterer uploads and things like that, where everyone's going everywhere, no one knows what's going on, Alysnes shines because Alysnes is a very dynamic, flank-based 1v1 kind of character that catches people off guard and is very good at parrying. They're very skill-based. You can parry a lot of melee attacks, which is good against Panthers, other Alysnes, as well as Welkins that get on top of you. So that can make a big difference there. So I would put Alysnes in C. Coming up next is Aquila. And Aquila is one of the best harassers in the game. Not the best, I think there's other options, but Aquila creates a lot of chaos through the harassment. The challenge with Aquila, I think Aquila starts out very strong at low tiers when people don't know what they're doing, but when you start getting to higher tiers, when you have support players that are playing incredibly well, or like Hurricanes or Stegos and Tricera that are holding a strong front line, I think that Aquila starts to fall off because comparatively to like a Panther or a Narukami, they don't have the burst damage to finish someone off very quickly. Aquila can keep peppering and peppering and peppering, but if the enemy team's playing really well, it can be hard for Aquila to find a foothold, which is why I put Aquila here in B. Again, very strong, very well played. They have good harassment and pressure, and they can be really annoying if you don't deal with them. Like if the enemy team has no flankers or high mobility characters, or even a Narukami to fight against them, it can be really tough to deal with the Aquila, but it's not going to be the same kind of stage presence that you have with some of these other strikers here on the list. Up next is the Falcon, actually one of my favorite mechs in the entire game. I love the Falcon, but the Falcon has one major weakness when it comes to higher level coordinated play, where everyone is playing the game to a competent level, right? Where everyone's doing their role, they're playing the objective, they're hitting their shots, they're hitting their abilities. The main problem with Falcon is the incredibly low shield, fluid armor, and armor in general. If you play exceptionally well, you use your mobility properly, you're moving around, they are incredibly strong, but they get punished really hard by high burst damage. So I'm actually going to put Falcon here with Alysnes in C, just because if you're against a very, very good Narukami or a very good Panther, Falcon is just a piece of paper. You will just get obliterated in a second, and if they're constantly putting that pressure on you, you're going to fall behind in the match because you're not able to use your speed because these players are outperforming you in the amount of damage that they can deal. Or if you're up against a target, like if you have a good Luminae or a good Pinaka on the enemy team and they're keeping people alive, or they have Stego or Tricera stacked on the point, you can't really get those flanks in, or there's a Welkin shutting you down, your natural survivability becomes a major issue in that point. But still one of my favorite mechs. I love the Falcon, super fun. Next up is the Hurricane, and the Hurricane is insanely strong. It is a very tanky mech that can create shields in the point, can distract any of the auto lock-on systems, so like machine gun fire, AoE fire, things like that. You can get some really strong control of the area with Hurricane, and I would say Hurricane is definitely one of the pub stomper characters, because if you have enemies that aren't playing around his mechanics properly, you can outright lose objectives completely, because he'll put up the little triangles that block automatic fire, so people are just shooting those aimlessly without realizing they're not damaging anybody, or he can put up the big domes on top of capture points and capture those. But as people get better and better at the game and get more acclimated to how the mechs are countered, how that Rochambeau interaction goes, I think Hurricane loses value relative to his compatriot Inferno, just because he doesn't have the same kind of output. He's got good harassment, good point control overall, but kind of like the Alysnes, I think that he is a lot more map dependent and mode dependent, and for that reason I'm going to put the Hurricane in the B tier. Next up is the Inferno, and I actually hated this mech when I first started playing. I did not like him. He felt really weird. He's super slow. All of his abilities have tons of requirements, like you can alternate between his cannons. You can put them together and do a long range shot. He has this big channel beam that does damage to a single target, and it feels like you're just being picked on. But as I've been climbing up the ranks in Mecha BREAK and playing more and more, Inferno has easily become one of the mechs that I fear the most out of any mech in the entire game. And you don't face them as often, but when you face an skilled Inferno player, it is devastation. It is so horrible to face against this mech, and I'm actually going to put the Inferno in S tier. Few reasons for this. One, they just got a little bit of an engine buff, which means they have decent mobility. They also have a little bit of an after image movement, so they can dash in, dash out. They can break off auto lock systems, which makes them, indirectly tanky because it's hard to hit them directly. They can hit the entire team with ticking damage with these massive beams, which is incredibly powerful. It's great against the squishy characters like Falcon, Alysnes, even Luminae that don't have a lot of fluid armor or shielding. You can actually just tick them down and burn them. It also deals damage to drones and anything else in the area, so he can just go up in the sky and terrorize everyone in the air, everyone on the enemy team and all of their deployables simultaneously, and force the flankers to try and go pressure him, but then he can go into Kaioken Goku form and avoid them, dodge them, and deal damage that way. He also, if you're really good at charging up his double cannon to deal damage that way, it is incredibly powerful to have some extra effect on that, which I think is really cool on top of everything else. So, that's kind of like his core kit, which works really well. The big killer, though, the slammer for the Inferno, is his single target channeled beam. This thing is a monster. It is slow, it is channeled, and it needs line of sight. So there's a lot of limitations around it, but as the Inferno player gets better and better at lining up that laser beam, it can become devastating, so horribly difficult to deal with him, because if you push him, he'll avoid you with the Kaioken. If you get on top of him, he'll beam you down to death, and all of the characters that rely on their durability to survive, Inferno can burn right through their armor and shielding like it's nothing. Crazy burst damage. So again, I think this is a sleeper one that when you first start playing, Inferno feels like he sucks. He's actually one of the best mechs in the entire game. Next up is Luminae, and I would say that this is one of the more high skill cap strikers in all of Mecha BREAK. The reason for this is, unlike the Pinaka, the Luminae is a lot squishier, light armor, not a lot of shielding, and uses a lot of positioning to take advantage of that. They are the best healer in the game by far. Pinaka doesn't even come close to the amount of healing that can be put out. Now, obviously, Pinaka has a shield, like a single target shield that can prevent people from taking damage in the first place, but that's more mitigation than it is true healing. So Luminae does ridiculous amounts of healing and some minor damage damage as well, which is quite useful. But the reason that I wouldn't put Luminae higher than where I'm going to put Luminae right now is mainly because of the skill requirement in playing Luminae. So I'm going to put Luminae in B, just below here, just because of that skill requirement. You have to be a weasel to play this character, like hiding behind walls, get behind a mountaintop, get behind a pole, dodge this, dodge that, place yourself perfectly, tuck behind the Tricera, jump over, tuck behind. Like, you just have to be this little rat that's running around, because if you ever get caught out, right, like if a Narukami can see you out in the open, if an Aquila can see you out in the open, if a Panther gets one good thrust on you, you're gone. You're dead, you're deleted, you're no longer there as part of the fight. But if you can live a long time by positioning well, planning well, and thinking well, I think that Luminae is an excellent support character to pick up, and they can make a huge impact on the play. It's just, if they're played, like if you're doing their abilities well, but you're not avoiding damage properly, you'll just be dead most of the time, and it's like you're not even part of the team. So it's not as often that you see a very good Luminae player, but when you do, they're incredibly difficult to deal with, because no one else dies unless you get the little rat that's scurrying around. Up next is Narukami, the MVP screen playmaker sniper rifle. They have ridiculous amounts of burst damage, but just like the Luminae, the Falcon, they are incredibly squishy. They end up using their stealth and their decoys to try and live a long time, and unlike Aquila, they actually have a very long effective range. So these, kind of like Luminae, you can face Narukamis that don't do anything, they sit too far away and they don't land their shots, and you can also face Narukami that are just gods on the battlefield. They're impossible to catch, you can't find them, they're still taking pot shots at you when you get close, they get perfect line shots, and they do ridiculous burst damage, and I think that's what puts them a little bit above the Aquila in that case, is that when Narukami is played well, and why I'm going to put them in the A tier, is that the burst damage is on point. They can do insane amounts of burst damage, wreck everyone in sight, and kill everyone off, and if they're skilled enough, just like the Luminae, that when they get pressured by flankers, like Alysnes comes by, Falcon comes by, Panther comes by, Skyraider comes by, even a Welkin comes by, if they can use their stealth and their grapple and their decoys properly and avoid being flanked and dying in that case, they become so powerful and impactful, because now you're keeping the flankers busy, you're sniping people on the point, dealing ridiculous burst damage, and it works really well. But kind of like Luminae, you can also have really bad Narukamis that don't have a big impact on the fight, but when played well, they are definitely a huge menace. Next is the Panther, and this one is the let me solo her of the game. He is a one-on-one assassin. This is the Shaco, the Loki, the character that just wants to sneak up on you and one-shot you and get in your face. They do have really great defense with shielding, self-shielding, and a personal shield they can deploy in front of them, which allows them to parry and stun as well. And they have very good melee damage that allows them to box with characters and do good damage, but their claim to fame is their lance thrust. So they can charge up their engines, wind up their lance, and then lunge forward, and they'll be able to pin a character to a wall and do a bunch of damage directly to armor outside of shielding. So if you get like a Luminae, a Narukami, a Falcon, any of these light armor characters that rely on their mobility and their shields to survive, Panther can overcome their mobility and can go right through their shields without having to damage it, which makes the Panther very effective. And I think that when people first start playing the game, they would probably put Panther in S, but I think the more you play the game and the more you get used to dealing with the Panther, I think Panther is actually just down here in A, maybe kind of like just slightly above the Narukami. The main reason for that is there are many techniques to avoiding the lance thrust from the Panther. Really, Panthers should only be catching you when you don't know where they are, right? When they come off camera, they come from an angle you can't see, and they've already charged their thrust and they hit you. But you can do tons of things, like you can dodge to the side, you can jump straight up. So there's a tracking angle for the lance thrust, so he'll charge towards you and start tracking your character, but there's a limit on how much that can turn. And so if you try to dodge early, he's going to keep tracking and keep up with you. But if you wait until he's just close enough that you can exceed his turn radius and you leap up into the air or leap to the side, he'll go right by you like ships in the night. He won't hit you. You'll be able to dodge him. And you can, I have clips of dodging Panthers for like a minute straight, just waiting for the right moment and jumping or dodging or going under something or behind something. And they just spend all their energy and time trying to lance you and they can't get it. I think Panthers are most effective when they come from the blind spot, when you're not prepared. But I think as people get better and better at playing the game, it gets harder and harder to play Panther effectively because they're able to avoid your thrust. And that's why I think that Panther, while still very strong, tanky, durable, one of the best flankers in the game, has counterplay, and I would put him, in my case, I would put him down in A. Next up is Pinaka. This is your more mitigation-based, play-making kind of support. Nowhere near amount of healing that Luminae has, but has a lot more options for creating opportunities for their team. And I'm actually going to put Pinaka up here in S, just in front of the Inferno, because Pinaka can completely change the landscape of a battle drastically. So Pinaka has the shield that they can place on characters. If you think about being able to like absorb a bunch of damage for a single striker for a period of time, you put that on a Panther, all of a sudden the Panther becomes a lot more dangerous because they can lunge on top of you. There's not much you can do about it because they have a shield. Same thing for Alysnes. Alysnes can go full lance, full like polearm, start whacking on you, making them, destroying you, taking you down. But on that front, like it makes them so much harder to counter the weakness of the Alysnes. Same thing for the Falcon, by the way. If the Falcon cannot be afraid of having to die in the next few seconds, they can unleash all of their damage and create so much opportunity. You can also, like, if someone's flanking your Narukami, like your Narukami's in the back trying to snipe, and a Panther goes for it, and you shield the Narukami right before the Panther hits, all of a sudden everyone knows the Panther's there now. The Narukami didn't die or take any damage, and he's in a really awkward spot. So Pinaka can create so many great plays. There's also decent healing from the drones, as well as the drill, like the melee, you know, servitude, like servitor drill that like heals with it is great in combination with like the tank characters or the stand in place characters, because Tricera or Stego can bunker down. Pinaka can get behind their shield and start healing them that way and create opportunities there. They can deal damage with their blockade. They can block doors on some of the indoor maps with their wall that comes down, and they have good damage as well. Like their volley actually does respectable damage, a lot more than Luminae, unless Luminae goes full offense and doesn't heal anyone. Pinaka has some great offense there, and I think a well-played Pinaka can change a game completely on its head. Up next is, might be kind of a controversial choice here, but up next is the Skyraider. I don't know how many people have played with a really good Skyraider, like a Skyraider that uses their mobility, their positioning, and their armor with all of their interference to the maximum. I think the potential for the Skyraider is insanely, insanely high. And personally for me, this might be wrong, but I would actually put Skyraider just above Panther. I think Skyraiders are one of the most underrated mechs in the entire game, and they can almost every game mode can change completely if you have a Skyraider. So they're basically like a Falcon with more armor and less mobility. So they don't have that kind of paper style weakness that Falcons have. They can stay in the fight. They can Starscream around by going plane into normal, into plane, into normal, but they have so much disruption and the possibility of burst potential as well. So when they're in their plane form, they can do a bombardment that is a missile that splits into smaller missiles, but it's kind of a skill shot. If you can get the missile to, like the first shell missile to come towards a target, and just before it hits them, it splits into the mini rockets, you can burst in like 2 shots a single mech. It does ridiculous amounts of damage, but it is a skill shot. On top of that, they have great counters to slow mechs because they can create that electric field that does ticking damage. It doesn't do a lot of damage if you touch the electric field and then get out of it, but if you get stuck in the electric field, like say an Aquila claws you in place and the Skyraider puts the electric field on top of you, it's going to shred all of your shields, all of your armor, and do a ridiculous amount of damage. On top of that, they also have the jamming missiles. They can cover the airspace and the area around an objective with that yellow mist. It reduces all laser weaponry damage that travels through the mist. Narukami, Aquila both use laser weapons. Their snipes will do less damage when going through the jamming space. It also blocks like lock-on targets, so characters that really like a Stego from far away that needs to lock onto a target going to start missing and things like that. So not only can they do incredible damage to finish targets off, they can also reposition very easily by going plane and then coming back down. They have incredible damage dealt to like fast moving targets, slow moving targets, stationary targets. They have jamming missiles that can disrupt the field and cause some, you know, interference in everything else. And you put it all together, they're not super easy to kill either. So I think Skyraider's one of the best. If you have a great Skyraider on your team, it makes everything so much easier. Like there's such a joy to play with because they control so many aspects of the battlefield all at once. Next, let's talk about the Bumblebee butt. Stego. Stego is Stego and Tricera, I think, are probably the biggest pub stomping characters. Like I would say Stego and Tricera and Panther are going to be your biggest problem when you first start playing. Just because you don't really understand the gameplay, you don't understand the counters, you don't understand how to move around properly. So if you just walk up to a Stego and you just like say, hey man, how's it going? He's going to melt your face off because the damage output is actually insane and ridiculous. I think it's ridiculous how much Stego and Tricera can do. So I think in a well-played game with a smart player, Stego is easily in the S tier. They are super bursty. They have lots of range damage. They even just got nerfed for their volley damage from their in turret form. Now they're a little bit more skill based than like a Tricera because their shield in turret form is one direction. So, you know, if you put your shield down, a Panther can come around it, a Skyraider can come around it, a Falcon, a Alysnes can come around it. They can sneak to the side and hit you. You can also get sniped by Narukami or Aquila if you're not in the right angle and position to deal with that. And so there are downsides to playing Stego, but if Stego gets a good setup and they're able to time their turret mode properly and get all of like their rocket volley from over their shoulder, their bombardment from their turret form, and also their main weapon fire, they can shred targets. And it's also a big, you know, not quite as much as Tricera, but it's still a big risk for characters like Falcon or Panther or even Alysnes when they're, you know, they're not heavy armor, they're not super tanky, and they are flank characters. So they want to try and flank. But if you, like as a Falcon, you fly over the field and you see a Luminae you want to finish off, and you dive into the Luminae, but you didn't realize that you just walked right into the crosshairs of a Stego who's sitting on the hilltop, you're gone. You're just going to get completely blown up from the distance, and this creates a very interesting counterflank option and like point control option because the Stego does so much damage. They're incredibly powerful, and they're not super easy to kill. And the next reason why I would put Stego in S and is like aside from their offensive capabilities is their smoke screen. Their smoke screen is one of the best utility abilities in the entire game. When you activate this, anyone inside the smoke screen cannot be targeted by anything. They can barely even be seen. You can't track where they're going. And so it like all of a sudden they disappear. You don't know where they are. You have to try and jump in there and try to find them. It is amazingly good. And in some cases, even better than like jamming missiles and even some of the shields you get from Hurricane because you can't hit anything. You don't know where anyone inside the smoke screen is. And that kind of disruption, like the AoE stealth, mirage treatment, is ridiculous. It's so strong if used properly, especially in the point defense kind of game modes. Next up is Tricera, which is the other variant of this kind of defender style character. And I actually would put Tricera maybe around equal to Stego. These guys are probably interchangeable depending on how good the player is. They both have strengths and weaknesses where they shine a little bit more than the other. So like, for example, Stego has when in turret form, has a directional shield, and Tricera has shields in all directions. What's cool about Tricera away from Stego is Tricera is really good, like even better than Stego. Like Stego's weakness is flankers, right? If Stego goes into turret form, and again, like I said, a Panther found a way around the front line, the line of scrimmage, or you have a Falcon or an Alysnes that are like moving around and they got the flank on you, Stego's gonna have a hard time dealing with that. But Tricera not only has shields in all directions, but also has a parry mechanic. Just like the deployable shield that you get from Alysnes, just like the deployable shield you get from the Panther, you can actually cause melee characters to bounce off of you if you start the turret form as they melee you. So you can actually be a lot more aggressive with Tricera by, you know, going into turret form when they melee, you bounce off and stun them, then you go into turret form and you start blasting them. The howitzers from Tricera is like the burst window. You have 3 shots on cooldown, so you can blow someone up really quickly, you know, melt the shields with the miniguns, blow them up with the howitzer, and you're good. And they can move in and out, and they're also insanely good on modes like Payload, where they can just turret up on the cart. They have shields in all directions. What are you going to do? They're just going to blast you if you get close. You really need like an Inferno to burn through those kind of characters to be able to deal with that, or maybe even a Hurricane if you have a good one on your team, and all of that puts that together. But I think Tricera and Stego there should be at least one of them in every single match because they're so core and fundamental to objective-based play, and they're insanely strong to boot. Next up is, or I guess last up, is going to be Welkin, the bully bot, the boxer. This is the bully of the game. They put people in a corner, they put them in a bully box, and they just bully them until they perish. They are just like you're not going to be able to do anything while I'm here, so you may as well get used to it kind of character. And kind of like Skyraider and kind of like Inferno, I think they have a very high skill ceiling that when you face a really good Welkin, it is you are just not going to have a good time. They are so good at shutting down at least half of this roster for everything they want to do, right? If you're a Falcon and you get stunned by a Welkin, you're in a bad place. Alysnes, bad place. Luminae, bad place. Narukami, you're not getting away, right? You get boxed in as a Panther, you're not going to kill anyone. You can't escape if you're a Skyraider. Like, their ability to disrupt while also dealing damage is great. Also, if they use their saw blades, they can not only disrupt the target they're meleeing, but also disrupt people around, because those saw blades cause mini stuns as well. They have crazy defense, good recovery, lots of pressure, and they can use their bully box kind of like a hurricane to block off capture points and block off areas that they stand in front of you, which makes it super different for a Welkin. And I think when played really, really well, I would actually put a Welkin like maybe like in between here. So like in S, like between like Inferno and Welkin are the ones that I would put up. Maybe Inferno slightly higher, but in some cases Welkin can be just above it, just because their ability to box and deal damage and stun. And there's a lot of characters that get completely and utterly shut down by a Welkin. Like, I'm not joking. Play Falcon or Luminae or Alysnes as against a very good Welkin, or even Narukami. You see the Welkin coming, you're like, oh great. Well, my life is about to be horrible for the next minute, because they just get on top of you. You can't burst them down. They're constantly stunning and throwing out blades and getting on top of you, boxing you in and spinning to winning, which, by the way, the spin to win for the Welkin is the only melee attack in the entire game, at least that I'm aware of, that can't be parried or deflected. Anytime you have a deployable shield like Tricera or like Panther or like Alysnes, you can actually parry melee attacks. You can also break out of them as well. But the spin to win on Welkin doesn't have that effect. He can just keep spinning even if you try to parry or shield it, and he's just in there just like a little top, spinning around like a Beyblade, dealing damage to everyone. Crazy disruptive, crazy business. So that is going to be the tier list that I have for the game right now. Of course, things change, balance changes. You might have a different opinion, but hopefully it's the conversation that matters most, that people care about and have that. So there you go. There it is. If you found value in today's video, leave a like down below. Leave a comment for the algorithm to help this video get seen by more people. And don't forget to check out my other channels for other content and other stuff and other things.